Welcome back to the tomb, all you creepy crawly, perfect people. I'm your host, Bone Daddy, back with another episode of Stories to Tell in the Boneyard. This podcast steps away from my normal lighthearted comedy music and stalks around the darkest corners of my imagination. As many of you already know, I live in mid-Michigan. Part of Michigan's lore, though, is the beauty and mystery of the UP. It's a beautiful area surrounded by the majesty of the Great Lakes and many thousands of square miles of some of the most beautiful wilderness this country has to offer. The Upper Peninsula of Michigan attracts people from all over the world to appreciate its beauty, from crossing the Mighty Mac Bridge to exploring, hiking, and appreciating its natural beauty. There's one part of the lore of the UP that's very well known. If you've ever stopped in any tourist trap in Diup, you'll know that the lore of Bigfoot, or Sasquatch if you prefer, is steeped into the culture of the UP. If you ask any real Youper, they will tell you that Bigfoot absolutely exists. So I started to wonder, if this mythic creature, this missing step in evolution, actually does exist, why haven't we seen definitive evidence? Well, I think I know the answer, and in today's episode you'll find out too.
The Woods of Escanaba by Jason Connor. Read by Rufus Quinn. The Upper Peninsula of Michigan is a place where the land forgets that humans ever learned how to tame it. It is a kingdom of black spruce, ancient granite, and lakes that look like shards of fallen sky, cold enough to stop a man's heart in mid-beat. In the UP, the silence isn't just the absence of noise, it's a heavy living thing that presses against your eardrums, waiting for you to make a mistake. Kevin Thorne believed he was the kind of man who could handle that kind of silence. Kevin was 42, a former actuary from Grand Rapids who had spent 15 years calculating the probability of disaster for other people. He had a divorce in his rearview mirror and a restlessness in his gut that felt like a slow-burning fire. He had come to Escanaba to find his center, a phrase he'd read in a glossy magazine that now seemed laughably naive. He was an experienced hiker, or so he told himself. He had the Gore-Tex boots, the high-end GPS, and a titanium camp stove. He had spent 3 days trekking deep into the backcountry, moving away from the marked trails, seeking the kind of solitude that only exists when you are truly lost. On the fourth afternoon, the silence changed. It happened near a nameless creek that ran thick with peat-colored water. Kevin had stopped to photograph a cluster of ghost pipes, those eerie, translucent flowers that grow in the deep shade. As he crouched, adjusting the aperture on his Nikon, the woods went dead. Not the gradual quiet of a settling forest, but a sudden, vacuum-like seal. The birds stopped. The wind, which had been whispering through the hemlocks all morning, simply ceased. Kevin froze. He felt a prickle of electricity dance across the nape of his neck, the primal mammalian alarm system that tells a creature it is no longer the observer, but the observed. It's a bear, he told himself, just a black bear. Probably a sow with cubs, but then came the smell. It didn't waft, it hit him like a physical blow. It was the stench of a slaughterhouse left to rot in a humid summer, mixed with the pungent, musky odor of a wet dog that had rolled in something dead. It was an ancient smell, an apex smell. A sound echoed from the dense thicket of cedar to his left. It wasn't a roar or a growl. It was a chuckle, a deep, resonant vibration that Kevin felt in his marrow more than he heard with his ears. It sounded horribly, sickeningly human, yet stripped of all empathy. Kevin stood up slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He scanned the tree line. At first, he saw only the vertical bars of the pines. Then, he saw a shadow that didn't fit. About 30 yards away, partially obscured by a screen of birch, stood something that defied the geometry of the natural world. It was tall, too tall. Even hunched over, it topped 7 feet. It was covered in hair the color of wet charcoal, matted with mud and dried blood. But it was the shoulders that haunted him, massive sloping slabs of muscle that looked capable of overturning a car. The creature stepped forward, and the forest seemed to shrink around it. For a fleeting second, Kevin felt a surge of something like excitement. He had heard the legends, the Sasquatch, the wild man of the woods. In the documentaries, they were shy, misunderstood primates, elusive spirits of the wilderness. He almost raised his camera. Then the creature looked at him. The eyes weren't the soulful amber eyes of a great ape. They were pale, milky cataracts of gold and white, devoid of curiosity. They were the eyes of a shark. They were eyes that saw not a man, but a calorie count. The creature opened its mouth, revealing rows of jagged, yellowed teeth, and let out a sound that tore through the silence. It was a scream that began as a guttural roar and ended in a high-pitched whistling shriek that sounded like metal grinding on metal. Kevin didn't think. He didn't calculate the probability of survival. He turned and ran. He crashed through the underbrush, his expensive boots sliding on the damp moss. He didn't look back, but he could hear it behind him. The creature wasn't crashing through the woods, it was flowing. He could hear the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of massive feet, the snapping of branches like toothpicks, and that occasional terrifying chuckle. It's playing with me, Kevin realized, a cold spike of terror driving through his chest. It's not hunting, it's herding. He burst into a small clearing and skidded to a halt. His breath was coming in ragged, burning gasps. He looked around, disoriented. The GPS in his hand was a useless piece of plastic. The only thing that might have helped him here is a gun, a great big fucking gun. Then he saw the kill. 10 feet away lay the carcass of a bull moose. It had been a massive animal, probably 1,000 pounds of muscle and antler, but it had been dismantled. The throat hadn't been bitten. It had been ripped open with a strength that defied biology. The ribcage had been peeled back like a sardine can, and the organs were strewn across the ferns in a visceral, glistening heap. The moose's head had been crushed. Not chewed, crushed. Kevin backed away, his stomach churning. He realized then that the legends were wrong. This wasn't some missing link or a shy cousin of the gorilla. This was something that had evolved in the dark corners of the world specifically to kill everything else. It was a biological machine designed for the singular purpose of predation. And he was the smallest thing in the woods. The chuckle came again, this time from directly behind him. Kevin spun around and swung his heavy Nikon camera with all his might. He felt it connect with something hard and hairy, a dull thud that vibrated up his arm. The creature didn't flinch. It stood there, its massive chest heaving, a thin string of gray saliva dripping from its lower lip. It looked at the camera in Kevin's hand with a flicker of something like amusement. Then, with a movement so fast it was a blur, the creature's hand shot out. It didn't grab him, it just swiped. The blow caught Kevin in the chest, sending him flying backward through a thicket of brambles. He hit a cedar trunk with a sickening crack, and the world went white. For a moment there was only the sound of his own blood rushing in his ears and the smell of crushed pine needles. When the world stopped spinning, he saw the creature approaching. It wasn't rushing anymore. It was walking with a slow, deliberate gait, its long arms swinging, fingers ending in thick black nails that looked like obsidian shards. Kevin tried to scramble away, but his left leg was screaming, a sharp, hot pain indicating a break or a severe dislocation. He dragged himself backward, his fingers clawing into the loam, leaving deep furrows in the earth. He looked up into those milky eyes and saw the absolute truth of his existence. All his life, Kevin had lived in the world of men. He had lived in a world of laws, of insurance policies, of paved roads and grocery stores. He had forgotten that the world was actually a vast screaming engine of consumption. He had forgotten that humanity was just a thin veneer of paint over a primate that had forgotten how to fight for its life. He was no longer an actuary. He was no longer a husband or a citizen or a hiker. He was meat. The creature paused, tilting its head. It seemed to be listening to the frantic, erratic drumming of Kevin's heart. It leaned in, its face inches from his. The smell was overpowering now, the smell of 1,000 old deaths. The creature opened its mouth and whispered. It wasn't a word. It wasn't language, but it was a mimicry of a human sound. It was the sound of a man sobbing. The creature had heard people cry in these woods. It had learned that the sound signaled the end of the struggle. It was mocking him. Kevin felt a sudden, hysterical surge of rage. He reached into his side pocket and pulled out his only real weapon, a folding hunting knife with a 3-inch blade. He screamed a raw, guttural sound of defiance and lunged upward, driving the blade into the creature's thigh. The knife sank in, but it felt like stabbing a radial tire. The creature didn't even scream. It looked down at the small piece of steel protruding from its leg, then looked back at Kevin. The amusement was gone. Now there was only hunger. The creature's hand closed around Kevin's ankle. The grip was absolute, a vice of bone and sinew that crushed the small bones of his foot instantly. Kevin shrieked, a sound that was swallowed by the indifferent canopy of Escanaba. With a casual, effortless jerk, the creature dragged him backward. Kevin clawed at the ground, his fingernails tearing, his back scraping against the rocks. He saw the forest blurring past him, the ferns, the moss, the ancient uncaring trees. He tried to fight, tried to kick with his good leg, but it was like trying to stop a landslide with a toothpick. He was dragged into the darkness of a rock overhang, a place where the sun never touched the ground. The air here was colder, smelling of ammonia and old blood. As he was pulled further into the gloom, Kevin saw the others. There were bones, hundreds of them, deer, wolves and bears. Then his heart stopped, a few human skeletons, bleached white and picked clean. Some were old, but one was fresh, still clinging to scraps of blue nylon fabric. The creature let go of his ankle and stood over him, its silhouette blotting out the remaining light. Kevin lay on his back, gasping, staring up at the towering monstrosity. He realized then that the creature wasn't just a predator. It was a collector. It liked the fear. It liked the way the heart tasted when it was pumping with pure, unadulterated terror. The creature leaned down, its massive jaw opening wide, the hinges clicking. It didn't go for the throat. It wanted him to stay conscious for as long as possible. As the first teeth sank into his shoulder, Kevin Thorne didn't think about his career, his ex-wife, or his life in Grand Rapids. He thought about the silence of the Upper Peninsula. He realized that the silence wasn't an absence of noise. It was the sound of the world holding its breath, waiting to see what happens next. Then the creature got what it was waiting for. Kevin screamed, the scream that can only be made by a creature that knows it's nearing its end. The scream that is the last fuck you to the world. And as the darkness finally closed in, the last thing he heard was the creature's chuckle, sounding exactly like his own father, laughing at a joke that little Kevin would never understand.
Well, friends, who's ready to go on a little camping trip in the good old UP? If you do go, you might want to remember to grab something bigger than a pocket knife to take with you, because as we learned today, you will not be the top of the food chain in the Woods of Escanaba. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share with your friends. Like, subscribe, post it on your town bulletin boards, or just play it at bedtime. As always, this is Bone Daddy copying Bill and Ted saying be excellent to one another and always beware of what goes bump in the night.
This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, and incidents are either the products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons living or dead or actual events is purely coincidental. Copyright 2026, Jason Connor and Bone Media Group, all rights reserved.